What I always find fascinating about today's era of animated films that present more ethnicities on the big screen is the constant debate about how something must be represented correctly in order to be understandable. Set in 1920s New Orleans, Disney's 2009 The Princess and the Frog marks both the studio's last original hand-drawn animated feature before the age of computer animation and the arrival of their very first black heroine. Subject to criticisms and speculations from the start, the much anticipated project can be seen to both address and to abolish race in its depiction of a black princess and ambiguously brown prince, not to mention the cast of swamp-dwelling creatures, the choice of New Orleans as the setting, and the uber-villain voodoo-practicing Dr. Facilier. This film represents a very complex moment in culture steeped in political correctness and adherence to the politics of color blindness. Now, in an unusual twist, political correctness isn't something that's enforced, but challenged, specifically the enforcement of stereotypes. Tiana's goal in the movie is carrying the legacy of her father of opening up a restaurant, doing so of working 2 jobs a day, earning slave wages in the process. And yet the movie doesn't go the extra mile, but this line can be interpreted in many ways.
Which is why a little woman of your background would have had her hands full trying to run a big business like that. You're better off where you at.
Now, with any great film, The Princess and the Frog could have a number of interpretations from it. Animated critic Caroline White reads the movie as an allegory to the negative effects of capitalism and the exploitation dominant groups may have over minorities. The viewer can almost see the romantic light of New Orleans through which the city is shown in contrast between the rich and the poor, and how the film tackles greed is symbolized through the making of shady deals, obtaining the green while literally becoming green. It's an interpretation worth exploring, but maybe for another time. Instead, I want to look at the symbolic enforcement in The Prince and the Frog of historical stereotypes and how they attempt to subvert the message into something positive. There are 2 things that give Princess and the Frog its very complex nature, and that's the use of simulacrum, Latin for likeness or similarity, referring to representations that reflect a cultural or social reality, and then there's mimetic, from the ancient Greek mimesis, refers to creating an inaccurate portrayal that can be seen to affect change or improve conditions, but can also be seen as having the ability to displace reality. The dominant message encoded within the 21st century is the ideology of color blindness, which denies difference based on skin color by simply refusing to see color. Author Jeff Curdy says that a person's skin color shouldn't overall justify their individuality. Princess Tiana, her skin color isn't subjugated to any racially prescribed tropes, especially looking at past Disney. Her drive displaces her race, viewing the world through a colorblind lens. We are essentially looking at her skin color, but also overlooking it. The juxtaposition between social classes is presented throughout the film with visual glances and illustrations. Charlotte, Tiana's white best friend, glamorizes fairy tales, lives in a big plantation house, and has a wealthy single father like most traditional Disney females. Tiana is the antithesis of this. Her mother works for the mayor as a seamstress, they sit in the back of a streetcar while leaving the glamorous lifestyle. The supposed princess lives in the shotgun-style homes, areas that are very familiar to minorities back then and even now. It's a clever way to show that Disney is destabilizing or at least questioning their own princess status quo. Whether it's race, sex, or class, Tiana's desire to prove her naysayers wrong works to provide a positive role model for many girls, not just black, but to a wide audience. Tiana's theme song, Almost There, is a song about rising to a higher social position, the basic premise of the movie. This plays the contrast of how both the princess and the villain try to achieve this ultimate fame. The film's addressment of gender is also worth mentioning. Critics have pointed out that Tiana spends a substantial amount of time as a frog than a human, stripping away her feminine beauty, which is complex since she's the first black princess in a Disney film. Well, throughout film history, the black female body has been evoked socially and historically to racial tropes. During the film's production, Disney was originally going to have Tiana follow the mammy stereotype. She would have been named Maddie and was a chambermaid to her best friend. And even before Tiana, problems and criticisms have appeared to be increasing focus on the body in the characters of color. Celeste LaCroix points out in her Black Sexual Politics, the costuming of these characters reflect stereotypical images of each woman's ethnicity. The overall effect associate the women of color as wild and exotic. The message encoding as a colorblind ideology is rather complex since our culture lives and breathes racial representation. So in the context of the movie, critics see Tiana's blackness as enough of a costume, and Tiana's frog state strips away what makes her unique and special. Despite her ambitions wanting to own a business, not subjugated by romance even when the chance is right, and at this point, the only Disney princess who essentially kills the villain of her movie. These same critics have pointed out that the movie enforces negative stereotypes held about a person's race and gender, holding on to familiar roles for, in this case, black women in American culture. However, their approach is something that another Disney movie did in portraying these stereotypes, The Crows from the 1941 film Dumbo.
Hey, I seen all that too. I seen a peanut stand and heard a rubber band. I seen a needle that winked its eye.
It's perceived as a stereotype, which it is, yet one can make the argument that the Crows act on their own volition, they aren't subservient in any way, and they're the ones who help liberate Dumbo from his captive state, because the Crows understand what it's like to be separated from the rest of society. So perhaps this movie's setting of the 1920s is used as a way of embracing these stereotypes of both race and gender, while essentially subverting it. Because while not a feminist film, Charlotte follows the ideology of more traditional views of feminism and female roles. She has internalized what society believes a woman must want, along with most fairy tales, a marriage. This can be seen as somewhat of a bridge or a cultural change within society, as we continue to change how we present these tropes in media. This new cultural change within the years has taken a shift of what was considered a positive trait, innocence, traditional femininity, and politeness, in some circles seen as a negative trait. Female characters that aren't damsels in distress are supposedly going against the norm, when in reality, it is the norm. This applies to Tiana's success as a woman of color as well, representing the middle-class black America while also suggesting that this is a universal attainable position. But it's to question through a colorblind ideology whether her success works to further a state of encouragement or disenfranchise other minorities who have yet to attain that success in the real world. This is what English philosopher Francis Bacon calls Morton's fork, a false dilemma where no matter what decision you make, you can only appease one dominant belief or the other, leading to the same result. So Disney creating this in-betweenness of racial representations is the studio not seriously wanting to go the extra mile and challenge these tropes. But yet, consumers are still here and they're buying into the movie's merch and characters. Why is that? Because even with the marketing of these Disney movies clearly imagined their audience would be mainly white, there's still a recognition of them expanding their own viewerships and introducing new concepts, where even classic Disney and even more modern titles, as they explore more cultures and representation, they both try to appeal to a wider audience in such a way to not alienate their core viewers, which underscores the complexity of diversity even in the 21st century. So upon this, The Princess and the Frog locates itself in this very complex cultural movement. It provides the audience with a positive representation of a black heroine, and friendships between multiple races exist, and interracial romantic relationships are seen as stable. In a world which we still struggle with race relations in the present day, seeing interactions that cross class, gender, and racial divides are images that provide an influence too rarely seen in media. While Disney is at least addressing the need for inclusivity, the complexities that surround these issues in this country guarantee that whatever message Disney desired to encode will be read through multiple lenses and ideological perspectives. In some circles, one would conclude the movie with a question: was Tiana too black, or just not black enough?